What is up, guys, and welcome back to another F1 2020 video. This time we are back for part 2 of the interview with Lee Mather, the F1 game director at Codemasters. And yeah, in the previous video, he talked more about the single player experience, so like the regular career mode, but also my team. So some big juicy details are in that video. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to see it. But in today's video, we're more covering bases on the online and customization side of things, as well as just general gameplay and how racing might be affected in this year's game. So things like physics and handling and how the input from the real-life Formula 1 drivers has shaped the way that the gameplay has been this year. Very juicy details, again, in this video. So huge thank you to Lee and Kosh Media and Codemasters for putting on this event and allowing me to have time with Lee. I really do appreciate it for answering all of my questions. So let's see what's cooking with F1 2020.
So with customization, because we've got my team, we wanted to obviously increase what we'd let the player be able to do for customization. So I think first and foremost, if you've got you've got the ability to put sponsors on your car. So in multiplayer, you can assign any sponsors you want anywhere on the car. They're completely free to be used all over the vehicle because they've no goals or financial value attached to them. In my team, obviously those sponsors are only ones that you can sign. So while they're all available, the only ones you can apply to the car are obviously the ones that you have signed to your team, because they have obviously goals and a cash value attached to them. Obviously beyond that, we've still got the ability to pick different skins for the car, which now is great because you can use that in my team. So I think that adds a lot more value to having a cool skin for the car, because you're using it both in the offline and the online game modes. Helmets, now you'll see your team logo on them. So once you've created your team badge, which is now created out of 2 layers, so you'll pick a background or a foreground, and then you can apply a treatment to that as well. So you can have maybe an embossed badge or a 3D badge. Then you can apply that. That applies to the vehicle, it applies to your race suits, it applies to your helmet. Obviously the race suits, again, you'll be able to pick the colour that you want to run on the suits. So maybe something that matches the car. And then because obviously with my team, I've spoken about how important the locations are, the environments, and how well presented they are, and how important that is in Formula 1, the whole image. We actually allow the player as well to tailor the colour of those locations. So the colour of the colour scheme of your team will pull out through your locations as well. The outfits that the team wear when they're working on the car or working in the facilities. And then a new area of customization is actually in the Podium Emotes. So we wanted to, again, do something new on the podiums. It's been mentioned numerous times that drivers some of them have very unique podium celebrations that they take, and we wanted to make sure we got something like that in there as well, so the player could pick the celebrations and then include them in game.
You kind of talked about this a little bit, but can you talk about any new features for online?
Yeah, so online's obviously an ongoing project. Every year we're constantly evolving what we do and trying to make sure that we give the best experience. So obviously last year we brought in leagues. So leagues will obviously be back this year, again with a little bit of refinement on what we've learned over previous years. Because of the nature of the online game as well, we have a post-launch live services team, live ops. So anything that we want to continue to work on with that as well, we can do so. Something we have done with the new tracks as well is, because a lot of it comes down to how we present the game online. For the 2 new circuits, both Zandvoort and Hanoi, we've got a new way of placing the cameras and setting up the visualization of not only the broadcast cameras but the replay cameras and the spectator cameras. So they should give a very Formula 1-esque view of the way that you spectate those races. But we've also, on the subject of how it's presented, we've also added in more of the Amazon Web Services AWS on-screen items. So now you'll see at the start of a race, if you're spectating, you'll see the predicted strategy for the pits, and then when the pit window's open, you'll get to see that window displayed on the right hand side. Again, so a couple of items there that are very much as you would see in Formula 1. So there's been a few things that we've done in those areas. So I mean, starting out with, as you say, the way the gameplay feels since 17, 18, 19. So as we've seen recently, a lot of the drivers have commented on the way that the grip feels in the game, in particular how they felt 19 didn't give the braking or the traction that they expected. So we've done some work on the physics this year, which essentially impacts on the inertia levels of the wheel and the tyre. So that unsprung mass, obviously, that carries a significant amount of weight. So we've worked on how the inertia works there. So now when you do brake heavily, you'll get those shorter braking distances. You'll get better braking feel. It won't be so slippery and slidey as you brake. You'll also find you'll have much more confidence on the throttle. So you'll be able to really get on the power earlier out of the corners in a controllable fashion. Again, that's very much what's been fed back to us, that that is how it would feel. In fact, one of the drivers did say that the way that the traction was being delivered in 19 with traction control on medium was very similar to a modern Formula One car, that they have that much grip these days. So that's an area that we've made significant gains. So I'm also talking a little bit about the tyres. We've also made some changes to the calculation in how we now model tyre pressures. So if you adjust the tyre pressures, they will now have a more significant impact on the temperature of the tyre and how that behaves. So if you're having trouble heating the tyre, obviously lowering the pressure will assist with that. And conversely, if you increase the pressure, you'll also change the characteristics of the temperature of the tyre. And then with regard to the AI, they're a constantly ongoing, constantly evolving project, because we have an AI team that work across the whole series of Formula One games, because obviously we have 2 teams working across multiple games now. They are always striving just to improve the AI in all areas. So last year we obviously put in some fantastic behaviours in that they would try and break the slipstream, they would move to the centre of the circuit to try and block the overtake. But this year I think one of the things that really stands out is some of the overtakes that they're pulling off. They're much cleaner. And I think that's partly because into the corner now we've given them more confidence with the steering. So they were occasionally pushing wide into understeer, which was causing them to, sometimes nudge the player out if they were going for an inside line. So we've certainly tidied that up. So the impacts will definitely be reduced from the AI. But the level of aggression is still equally as strong. And something I've noticed in particular is, that first corner where there's something to be gained, you'll often see an AI taking a crazy Danny Rick move down the inside, trying to go late on the brakes and gain those places. And I think the dynamicism of racing with the AI, is almost as strong as if you're racing with a bunch of real people. It really does give you that excitement, that ebb and flow, and that intelligent feeling of racing against intelligent AI.
It was really interesting to hear what you said about the changes to the handling. It just sprung up another question I had. How do you feel about the dynamic of racing, say online? I feel like there's lots of trains and stuff. Have you made any adjustments to, say, dirty air or slipstream?
Yeah, we've tweaked those a little. But I think as we saw in the race at the weekend, in particular with obviously Albon and Leclerc, they raced incredibly closely for the race, for the duration of the race, and they were able to effectively use the DRS and the slipstream to constantly overtake each other, which some people thought was a bit excessive, but it actually produced incredible racing. So we've tweaked those a little, but what's particularly different, obviously, in 20 is that now you'll have the overtake button, and that the general ERS will be managed by the AI in the game itself. So as in real life, where the team program the ERS to be managed automatically and the driver's given the go-ahead where they can use the additional power for overtakes, that's going to bring in a whole new element to the overtakes and the defending and the overtaking in the game. I think over the course of a race, it'll be quite reminiscent to how things were back when we had Ers in the game. Maybe not quite as humorous as the whole, I'm just going to give myself a boost out of the corner because I've made a mistake, because I think there will be more management in mind. Obviously, you'll find yourself a bit of a sitting duck if you use all the power too readily, and the damage in the long term is obviously if you deplete your batteries completely, you've then got to spend a lap or two trying to regain that charge, and the system will obviously try and compensate for that and allow you to recharge. So I think the thing that will produce the biggest difference there will obviously be the tweaks we've made to the aero, but in particular the way that the ERS is used and deployed.
Will the ERS mapping be the exact same for everyone in multiplayer?
So the mapping will be the same, but it obviously has to react to what the player's also doing. So yes, there is a basic mapping, as I think there probably would be in real life. If you were to put a Formula One car on the track and send it round, there would be what the team would derive to be probably the perfect map. Maybe I expect there's no such thing as perfect, but the one that would give them what would be potentially the best lap time or the best lap time over a period of time in the race. But obviously with player intervention, that can vary quite drastically. So the more you use the overtake button, the more the ERS system's got to compensate and get your charge back. So the ERS system will be running at a lower mode to try and compensate for what you're doing with the overtake button. Also, something which naturally comes through the physics, as you would have found over the years, however you drive the car also has an impact on everything you do. So, for example, obviously, as we know, ERS charges in multiple ways. It charges through the heat converter, and it also charges through how a player brakes as well. You know, you generate that kinetic energy back through the brakes. So for somebody who's doing maybe a little bit more lifting and coasting and saving fuel, they're going to be generating probably less energy because they're only relying on the MGU-H. Whereas if you're braking really heavily for sustained periods of time, you know, you're going to be generating yet more energy through the MGU-K, which comes back through the braking. So again, it's one of those things where it's very active, very live, and the game manages it. Obviously, if you just let the car run around on its own, it will manage it in a base way. But as soon as the player intervenes, or as soon as the racing starts, you know, that's where that will vary, and it will always obviously try and manage it to the best of its ability around what the player's doing.
And so there's one last question from Ben, and that's how much is the real F1 driver's feedback shaped the gameplay experience?
So I think ultimately, I'm not sure if Ben might have been there last year when we were discussing with Lando about the ERS. It was just a throwaway comment that Lando made to us while we were out after one of the F1 esports events, which set us on the trail of, right, we need to completely change the way the ERS is configured and how that's set up. So that was a huge amount of help for us. This year, obviously, now we've seen a lot of the drivers playing the game more intensely with the VGPs. So at this stage, you know, we're fairly locked down in what we're going to be doing, and we are looking at what we might want to do, you know, post-launch. But the great feedback that we've had so far, very much so around things such as the last sector at Catalonia, which got mentioned recently. Well, we've actually made that change already. We've changed the way that the height undulations have affected the circuit there. We also fixed the bump at the end of Suzuka, which they haven't mentioned yet, but I'm sure it's coming if we use Suzuka at any point. But also, the way that the traction, as I've mentioned, and the braking is in the real sport, those are the things that we've had fed back to us, you know, very recently, and we're really pleased that, you know, those are things we're actually already on top of and things that we've already made those changes to. So obviously that feedback's been very recent, and we can act on some of it. Obviously now we're going to get the game finished, and then we can obviously look at anything else that comes back from the drivers over the rest of these VGP races. But I think we're really pleased that the feedback we've had so far, we're actually way ahead of, so that's really good.
And there we go. That is the interview with Lee Mather. Hopefully you guys got a lot of information out of that, and looking forward to a lot of new features with F1 2020. So just to touch upon most of those: customization, tire pressures, which is a big one this year. You can individually change each separate value on each corner of the car. So front left, front right, right rear, left rear as well. It's pretty mental, and that'll certainly help the competitive scene. And I don't know, people who are just wanting to get on top of setups and everything like that, that is something that'll be much appreciated on the more competitive scene. AI improvements, less understeery, and they're a little bit more aggressive on the first lap. Better replay cameras, and just better replay features, which is really, really cool. Of course, the F1 drivers recently jumping on the game and you know, helping shape their feedback, that with the ERS, like Lando Norris said, but then also making the tracks a little bit more accurate as well, which is something that everyone, myself included, will really appreciate. And then the final thing, which is probably maybe the most contentious, is the whole Ers mapping. And well, the overtake button is a handy feature that is in this year, but when it comes to F1 esports and league racing, well, people already have their gripes about auto ERS and how it may not be deploying, you know, fairly for everyone. Sometimes it's in lower modes when you want to be in higher. You can't exactly control it. I mean, you can control that now with the overtake button if you so wish, but by what Lee's saying, it looks like your driving style is really going to affect how well your car can recover ERS. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting if the ERS deployment is quite aggressive, if it wants to spend as much as it recovers, or, you know, if it's more conservative, if it's more of a conservative system, then it may be a little bit more fair and may not expel as much, and you'll have to press the overtake button a little bit more to get the most out of it. But either way, that's something that's going to have to be taken a look at quite considerably, just to make sure that it's balanced in a way. But by the same token, it is going to be affected by your driving style, just like other factors like tire wear. You know, tire wear isn't equal for everyone, but you know, we'll have to wait and see. I'm really interested to see how the competitive scene is going to evolve with F1 2020. It's certainly not going to be as daunting as what it was on this year's game, what with having to manage the ERS manually. But yeah, really interesting things brought up in this interview, and yeah, I just can't wait to get stuck in and see how the dynamic is of everything once we get going. But once again, thank you to Lee for answering all the questions. Thank you to you guys for tuning in. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys for a brand new video very soon.